And since the name suggests it's Jeremy Blaine, let me also invite my friend from UK, Mr. Jeremy Blaine.
Thank you very much, CK. Great to be back.
Yes, Jeremy, as you know that we are discussing about the impact on the business because of this pandemic situation. I think that today we must discuss about the distributed workforce, which has become the new normal nowadays. So, we would like to know how it has changed the way we work today. I think you can just throw a few points from your global experience.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting? I've invented something this year, CK. So you know VUCA, of course, volatile, uncertain, etc., complex and ambiguous. I've invented VUCAD and I've published that. And the D stands for distributed because I think it's that significant in terms of a challenge to organizations to welcome and embrace rather than just handle a more distributed workforce. We've been forced into that this year somewhat, and many organizations have come through that thinking, you know what, wow, actually we can do very different things. So you have organizations already that practice that. So WordPress, for example, most of us who have a website may have a WordPress background. They're 100% remote working company, 100% distributed. They don't have an office, so they have spaces that they can gather. Even some of the more traditional businesses this year have come out, like McKinsey, for example, big one, Barclays, PwC, talking about this has helped us reimagine what our working could look like. We estimate, some of them were estimating that they can take away 40% of their bricks and mortar offices, which is a huge change, which is for me why I go back to the point I added the D to VUCA, because this is a significant challenge, but it also is a significant upside when you start to consider the financials. And in fact, one company has already done this way back in the 90s, which was IBM. You've got a high proportion of their workforce already working in this way, and it has saved billions of cost for IBM over the years, and it's the way that they're going to work moving forward. And many more are following suit now, CK.
Jeremy, I think you make a very valid and very strong point, and you also added D to it. But let me share a little story about myself. Um, just trying to bring to a point where we can ask you a second question. The story goes in the middle of last year, we were experimenting with something called virtual office. And the idea at that time was that we don't have to really depend on the workforce. I mean, we have two offices in India as a company, but we didn't want to restrict ourselves to only two locations because talent can come from anywhere. And we were experimenting. In the end, we got POC done by two companies. One was an Israeli company, and one was a LA-based company. And the product is a virtual office product. And what it does is basically create uh, different video sessions, and then it has all the other ingredients which are required in an office rolled into it. So things like timekeeping, attendance, you want to call your colleague for a cup of coffee, you want to go for a meeting in a meeting room. So all those functionality and probably much more. There was a lot of collaboration, integration with Microsoft platform, also with Google Docs, and much more. And then the pandemic started. So for us as a company, it was very seamless migration for us to move on to the virtual office platform. And I must clarify to you that our intention was not to, leverage the distributed workforce. Our intention was to basically reduce cost, because what we were saying is that, hey, why have to look at large cities to hire people in my own office when I can go to a tier C class or tier D class city? Probably I'll get the same amount, same quality of resource, maybe better at a much lower cost. That was our intention. What I see now, and here's the question which I want to ask you, is that you know the Zoom has come in a big way, and all these video conferencing tools have come in a big way, but the virtual office And I must also share this information that when we were doing the evaluation of these tools, we found 40 of these different companies providing this similar solution. But I'm surprised after a year, not many companies have done uh, anything in the market, even though there is a requirement where the small medium enterprises and startups, um, you mentioned about the large companies like Google and WordPress, but the smaller companies will have more requirement to move on the virtual platform. But somehow I don't see that happening. Would you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I do. I do. And like you, I have, in fact, I've been a remote worker for many, many years, probably since about 2004, even way before we had all of our mobile tools. And you get used to doing things with the available technology that you have, and then you create networks. And then, as back then, LinkedIn was a really great tool for me to use from a networking point of view. As I then built a business in my previous company, I set up business for Asia Pacific, managing India to the Pacific. And I was based in Singapore for 7 years. And I set up the business, which is a very traditional kind of small, medium business, in a very different way to the rest of the organization, to embrace contingent workforce and to embrace new ways of working, fueled by technology, not overwhelmed by technology, because that is a really good point that you raise. There is so much out there that the danger is it becomes overwhelming and the technology then becomes the issue rather than the solution for everything. If I fast forward to now, then my own business, Performance Works, I operate across continents. I have collaborators everywhere, etc. And we have multiple projects going on at the time, and I am 100% contingent workforce and distributed working. I do not have one permanent employee apart from myself in the organization. So it's first of all, it starts to look at, from my point of view, it's looking at a different business model, and then a different way of remunerating your contingent workers, not just in terms of project payment, but retainers, reward, recognition, which often many organizations don't think. And even as a small business, being able to bring all of that round. So you've got the human bit key. And I found, I'm not sure about you, CK, as well, maybe you'll have a view on this. I found what was really important first, before we got to the technology, was to help everybody get on board with that journey, whether they're permanent or whether they're collaborator resource, and start to adapt the culture of the organization for where you need to be for the future. So more appropriate for the digital era that we're in right now. So people's mindsets were on that journey ahead, and were ready to try new things and change and adapt and evolve. So from that perspective, that is the point then I come into the technology. And it's not about technology first, it's about where am I as an organization, as a team, as a need, and then what are the most appropriate technologies to fuel that. One of the problems for many organizations, particularly, as you said, actually many startups that I've experienced and worked with, they go for what I would call the fad and the fashion. So Zoom is in fashion this month, so we'll use Zoom. Or no, Google Meet is a little bit cooler, so we'll use Google Meet, etc. And we'll have all of these tools, and then suddenly nobody knows what to do. So you have to really establish the need and understand what appropriate technology will fuel the type of working that you do collaboratively. It's very interesting you asked this question, because I posted something similar on LinkedIn yesterday, and I had a thread of a conversation through my post with a guy called Dominic about these tools, saying the same, because there's so many. And we both concurred that we both sort of found in a roundabout way that we were using very similar things. So for example, for my team, I'm using two tools. I'm using Slack and I'm using Zoom. And they do exactly as you describe, CK. It's collaborative, it's about communication, it's about spot messaging, it's about project teams and tasks. And I can map in other technologies like Trello, for example, if I'm doing just-in-time task management and maybe moving into project management. But also I can wrap in my Zoom into Slack. I can link the two things together. so that when I'm working with my team, even if they don't have certain one of the apps, they can start to come in on the back of mind. So I think you raise a very important point. I think one of the issues for many organizations is that they've just gone down and they've kind of grabbed a whole lot of technologies and feel one week to the next that one works better than another, and maybe isn't asking the key question: what is our need? What will fuel our organization and enable our people? What will be best for not just the internal, but for the external, and doing it that way. And I think that's really the way to look at it, because the technology is key. The other thing to add in mind, final point, sorry, on this is the fact that bandwidth also is the key. Is what is the most efficient technologies that you can use that that make the most of the bandwidth available, rather than sucking the power out of it.
Well, I think the issues related to software and hardware and the network is not really a major issue, although these are the issues, as you rightly mentioned, that we need to consider that if there is a person based out of his home office and we are engaging with him, then obviously he should have the right connectivity. So I think that is given, that if you don't have connectivity, then you're not going to be available for work in a distributed environment. Having said that, there are a lot of social imbalances which has also come in. For example, you are forced to see the living area of your employee. You never got exposed to the living world, and if there are young parents, you can sometimes see babysitting happening during the office environment. So I think that is also a big change which people have to grapple with right now with the distributed workforce. What are the tricks of handling this, especially if you're addressing the entrepreneurs, the CEOs of SMEs and startups? Because inevitably this is going to come up with a distributed workforce. How they should handle this?
Yeah, you raise another good point. And the first thing that I would reinforce to everybody watching this is that we're not yet normalized in terms of remote working. You're absolutely right in what you said, is that we've been forced into this year. We're all in our homes. I'm I'm embarrassed to say I'm in the old porch of my house. Looks like I'm in a castle, CK, but I'm not. I'm in the old entrance to my house, which has become a little office, because I used to have a co-working space here and another space there. And we get used to that, and we see, cats are walking here and there. We have work-life balance, which has really come to the head. And while some organizations have been talking about it, it's become very real this year, because many people around the world have had to homeschool their kids as well, who've been off at the same time. Maybe they're a single parent, maybe they're two parents working, and they're having to balance all of this and sharing it. So organizations, as much of people, have had to be very flexible. And in fact, it's the smaller organizations that have been more agile and more adaptive to this, of course, because they haven't had to transcend age-old processes that are in place and struggle with legacy technology which isn't fit for purpose to help organizations. So many startups and smaller organizations have managed to make some very quick wins in this space and be more enlightened in terms of how they're operating with the individuals. Now, before we got to the pandemic in 2020, there was a lot of work done around space and place, because this was a trend that was already happening. We talked in one of our previous discussions around the rise of the blended workforce, the independent workforce, which is there. And they were using, like I was, things like co-working spaces, working hubs, could be things like WeWork or independent places in the cities that they were working. And they were creating the social sort of centers for themselves around these places without necessarily having to be in the office that they were working for. And that's whether they were permanent employees or whether they were independent workers on a project, to be fair, because that's the two things coming together. So Cushman and Wakefield, actually, who are a big sort of infrastructure organization, did quite a lot of surveys around this and looked at space and looked at workspace and workplaces, and thinking about how creative some places have become to create these very usable spaces that not only provided great work environments, but provided the social environment that they found was lacking because not many organizations were doing it. We only hear of many of the big organizations and if you like, the more trendy techie organizations like Google or Spotify, and what their offices look like and how they've thought about the spaces for their employees. That has now filtered through to many organizations, traditional ones, but particularly startups and small medium organizations who realize they can make small changes that make a very big difference. The other thing that has been happening though since the pandemic is, of course, we've all had to move away from our co-working offices or permanent offices. I talked about Spotify, I talked about some other companies. They've already announced that they won't be going back to the office until 2021. Now some saying possibly till mid 2021, but we don't know about the vaccine, all of these kind of things coming into it, but that's what organizations are thinking of. So what they have done also is realize that, as well as this not being normalized and this impacting potentially mental health, physical well-being, they've started to put in more socialized activities in a working day. So they've moved to more asynchronous working. So they've transcended having to replicate what we were doing at the office, which was the danger that many organizations, or the trap that many fell into, by not rethinking how people would work productively at home. So they were able to rip up the existing rule book and say, actually, there are different ways of productive work. There's techniques like the Pomodoro technique. There are things that we know we need to do, but we can be more empowered as individuals to do it as distributed workers. So many have got used to doing that. Many organizations have now come in and started putting more socialized activities in there. Some start with TikTok mornings, which is not everybody's cup of tea, CK, he said as a 53-year-old man. But for some it is, and particularly in newer organizations, younger millennial organizations, these kind of things make a difference because it's energizing, engaging, mobilizing, motivating. And traditional leaders and, potentially leaders like me need to embrace these things because they're really important as part of fueling our more distributed workforce and how we'll go forward. There is one other aspect which we've not picked up on, which is a very important one in distributed workers now, and the ability for organizations to better impact not just their internal community, but the external community to the organization, to where their people are based or where they operate, where their factories might be, and so on, to actually have a more positive impact on society around community and socialize in the external community too. So we can do those things that many are now calling for in this decade ahead, which is purpose-driven leadership and purpose-driven organizations. With more dispersed people and distributed workforce, we've got a much greater opportunity to actually contribute to the local community, maybe in small ways to start with, but we can do it, we can contribute it. So we can not only impact the internal community, we can actually now start to look at the external community. So this, for me, offers a massive opportunity in the new distributed workforce, whether permanent or independent, to really reimagine how we operate our organizations, how we build our teams, whether permanent and independent, and how we impact the communities within which we serve.
So Jeremy, you mentioned that you have been in the distributed work arena since quite some time, and there are many professionals who work this way for many years. Um, there were, a great business domain which was called co-working, and that was very popular. In fact, large companies, listed companies on Nasdaq, got into this space just before the pandemic. So, do you have an opinion on this co-working space arena? What is the future of this business?
Well, as an advocate, prior to the pandemic, I had a co-working space, and I preferred that through having my own either small office for myself or small office where some of my collaborators could come in as well. because I just bought into the fact that I loved working around people who weren't necessarily in my industry. I could socialize on a different level with, also get creative with, and get new ideas and be constantly learning from how people were organizing. So I really was thoroughly approving from them. And I put a caveat there. We all know what happened with WeWork and the leadership of WeWork and what was happening there.
I didn't want to mention
So
the name.
I know, but I won't say that because it still exists, of course, as it is now. But the concept actually is key, and I think it will come back. It will come back. So we're doing that virtually at the moment. We're having virtual sort of co-working, and we're still doing what we did in those spaces. We might have small collaborative groups working on projects, we might have small teams based in certain regions and countries. And I also think for organizations, it's no bad thing having your people around other people who can add different points of view and ideas. I think the traditional mentality of that for organizations is, oh no, but they're my competitors, they're going to poach my staff, they're going to take these. But I look at it as it's a learning opportunity. It's personal development that you get every day by just being around different people from different industries with a very different point of view from your own, particularly if you've been in the same industry for a long time. So I do believe that many people in the current way of not normalized distributed working, we're all in our homes or in our little spaces. I'm sensing that people are really craving that social touch again. Yes, we acknowledge that we can do things like this online, but as some of the lockdowns have been released and we've started to meet people for coffee again or got to get back together with people again, we've really enjoyed it. And we are social creatures as human beings. So I think it will come of age again, but I think it will be slightly different to what it was before. It may be reimagined for the post-COVID era, but I think it will be with us for a long time. And let's not forget what I said before. Many of the organizations the big organizations who are now coming out saying, look, we think we can reduce our bricks and mortar footprint by up to 40, even 50%. They're going to have to deal with their people somehow. Some will be home working, but some may be in co-working spaces that they will create relationships with locally, potentially, and give people the opportunity to be more socialized, either with their own colleagues or with other people, which they're realizing now more than ever is really important.
So I think the co-working arena will not go away, but
No.
somebody can hold on to it. Then probably after a couple of years, it will come back again, become a reality of the distributed workforce. So I think we have run out of time today. We had a very interesting discussion. I think there is a lot of ideas and a lot of techniques which people have to learn. And I think you are available to our viewers always, where if they want any help, they plan to transition from brick and mortar setup, from co-working setup to truly virtual space, I think they can reach out to you. And in the end, I would like to just make one comment that you can actually make the perception quite real if you put your Excalibur behind you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. You certainly can.
And you are in UK, so it is going to be very believable. You have a castle, and you guard your castle with your Excalibur.
I know it would suit here, wouldn't it? Because, I think I may have said to you before is that it's interesting because, of course, a lot of my work is over, from India right through to the Pacific. And when some people see me for the first time here, they genuinely do think that I live in a castle. And of course, now I now believe it myself, and I just start with that now. So I'm coming to you from my castle. Next time we meet, I'll see if I can get Excalibur on the back for you, CK. How's that?
Great, great. So we look forward to your night shining night suit also.
Yes, okay, great. That's excellent. Thank you very much, CK.
And we will catch up next Tuesday, Jeremy. It was always pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Hello, friends. This is Chandrakant from Akulmach Technologies, and it is my honor to welcome you all once again on Jeremy Blaine Live. And since the name suggests it's Jeremy Blaine, let me also Hello, friends. This is Chandrakant from Akulmach Technology.